podcast?
Sure.
All right, so what's your name?
My name is GaryArndt.
Okay, Gary, nice to meet you. And what's your podcast?
Everything Everywhere Daily.
All right, how long have you been doing that for?
2.5 years.
And give me your elevator pitch. What's your podcast about?
Learn something new every day.
Okay, I feel like I've heard of it before, potentially.
It's gotten pretty popular.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, check this out. So tell me a little bit about your podcast growth.
Well, I started it 2.5 years ago. I'll do about 1.4 million downloads this month.
That's fantastic. So what were some of the means in which you got to that number of downloads?
Work my ass off. Having a daily show obviously helps. And I also did a lot of paid promotion.
Okay.
So I buy ads on podcast apps, other podcasts, do feed drops, things like that.
All right, and what would you say have been some of the low points and some of the high points for you in growing your podcast?
Well, the high points are when you just have this. So the last 2 months I've had a ton of growth. I went from I've almost doubled my traffic in about a period of 2 to 3 months. So I was doing in the high, not quite 1 million, maybe in November, and now it's well over 1 million a month. So that's a high point. Whenever number go up, that's good. And what's frustrating, and I think this is the frustrating thing for every podcaster, whenever you have a plateau, so long as you can see progress, that something's getting better, however you measure that, it's easy to keep going. And people get frustrated when they don't see the progress. And I've had times where things plateau, or even though on average I get about 20% monthly growth on the show.
That's fantastic.
I've had a few months where it has backtracked a little bit by 1% or 2%, or plateaued, and that gets frustrating. And I think everybody encounters that, and you just need to be able to plow through and kind of trust the system.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on point with that. And in fact, many of the people that came yesterday mentioned that very same thing. Burnout is something that is kind of prevalent, and there's such a feedback mechanism with doing what we do. I also host a podcast that when you kind of are waiting, when you kind of get started, you kind of want that feedback, but then you got to get to a point where you're not banking on that feedback. You're doing what you're doing because you love doing it, and it's not necessarily dependent on getting that feedback.
No, and that's what's frustrating about podcasting. There's no like button, there's no share, there's no comments. So you need people to leave reviews or something. And one of the things I did is I put a section at the end of every show, and it's a short show because it's daily. It's about 12 minutes long, where I'll always read a listener review. And what it's done is it's encouraged people to leave more reviews.
That's a great tip right there.
And I always, it isn't just reading the review to stroke my ego. I always make a joke out of it, or I have certain bits that I run. Because it's a daily show, and I've done a lot of them now, over 900, I initially had people saying, I've listened to every episode. And so if you ever watch Saturday Night Live, they have this thing called the 5-Timers Club for hosts that have done the show 5 times. And it's kind of just a gimmick that they have where there's supposedly an actual clubhouse somewhere and they get smoking jackets. And so I created that for people who listen to every show. And so that suddenly became a thing. And I had more and more people saying, I've joined the Completionist Club. And so I would create these elaborate things like, you're in the Canadian chapter, and we have Caesars available and poutine at the bar. And then I had parents that were saying that they were listening to the podcast with their kids. So I created another gimmick. I created something based on the X-Men, where they have this the Charles Xavier Institute for Talented Youth or something. So I created the Everything Everywhere Academy for Curious Children. And that became a bit. And then I had truck drivers that started saying that they were listening. So I created the Truck Driver University. You can learn while you roll. And all of these things, not only creating a sense of community, but it also increases that feedback. And yeah, it's all kind of worked.
Yeah, and you tapped on it right there. Community. I mean, it's you're building kind of like a self-driving interest in engagement and people wanting to stay active, stay a part of it, and getting that kind of feedback that they're part of something, right?
Which is hard for me because my show is literally about everything, right? It's an educational show, and the topics are very varied on purpose. So it's not like this is the community of people who do this thing, or they're from this place. No, it's a very open-ended, and it's just curious people.
Yeah. All right, perfect. So a couple more questions. If you could create a tool to help make podcasting easier, what would it look like?
It's pretty easy already. Most of the tools that I see tend to revolve around, because at least for what I do, it's a solo show, it's scripted, so I just read into a microphone, and by the time I'm done reading it, the edit's done. So I edit live. I read until I screw up, and then I just go back to that point, and then I start again. And so when I'm done reading, it's ready to go. It's hard to get much simpler than that. Most products tend to, if it's like an editing product or something, it's dealing with an interview where you have multiple sources of audio. You have ums and ahs. You have things that you may want to take out of the discussion because it's not scripted. So for me, I don't know. There aren't a ton of tools that I really need because I have the simplest show possible.
That's fantastic. All right. Tell me what you think about my assertion here that you have to be rich to make it in podcasting. You believe that?
I can say this. So before I started this podcast, I was a travel photographer. And in March of 2020, I got COVID, lost 95% of my income, got myself deeply in debt because of that, and that was when I started my podcast. So I had a negative net worth, and 2.5 years later, just by doing it, I'm at where I am with the show. So
that's fantastic.
It's the counterpoint to the claim that you have to be rich to make it in podcasting.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for that feedback. Well, GaryArndt, ladies and gentlemen, check out his podcast. What's the name of your podcast one more time?
Everything, Everywhere Daily.
All right. Well, thank you so much.